I'm not seeing really too many signs of dumping. We did see that during the initial news of the US airstrike on Iran. And this 3-day stretch between June 22nd and 25th was tumultuous, and we saw some major volatility in both crypto and the S&P 500. But you can see prices did not really get affected.
Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me is Brian from Santiment, and we are going to do a deep dive into the metrics around Bitcoin, XRP, Ethereum, Solana, and much more. Brian, great to see you.
Nice to see you, Tony. It's good to see July kicking off with some nice gains here after June was kind of clouded with worries of war, Trump and Elon battling, all sorts of fun stuff, but much to get into today.
Yeah, it seems like we got some bullish momentum. Bitcoin back over $109,000 at the time of recording. So let's kick it off with Bitcoin. What are you seeing from a sentiment standpoint? And, how is that playing out with, stats like I think it's an MVRV.
MVRV, mean value to realized value. It's a really important metric that measures how undervalued or overvalued an asset is based on just average returns, where each coin is essentially a zero-sum game. I'll look at that in just a moment. I just wanted to share the overall returns, and things are kind of being overshadowed by Trump with hat right now, which just got a huge plus 180% jump in the last week. But you can see Bitcoin up a modest 2.5% or so. Ethereum up over 6%. It rebounded well past 2560 as of the time of this recording. So people are pretty happy about that after starting to wane in their optimism last week. We also see a few other big jumps from assets like Altcoin, Hyperliquid, Avalanche had a modest boost, Aave up almost 10%, Pepe, Uniswap, and Verum, just to name a few others. Arbitrum way over here at plus 13% as well. So many gains happening overall. When it comes to Bitcoin, I wanted to lead by looking at its price correlation with the S&P. So I'll hide gold's price, which is also doing pretty well for what it's worth. Whether you're in Bitcoin/crypto, the S&P 500, or gold, you're likely quite happy over the past 3 months. It's actually, today marks the 3-month anniversary of that April 2nd announcement of the tariffs by Trump, where he had that big poster board that people were memeing and taking very seriously at the same time. So I can't believe it's been that long, but you can see just how much things have recovered since the bottom, which occurred a few days after that on April 7th. Bitcoin's up about 44.5%, while the S&P is up about 22.5% since that time. Both pretty impressive for what would be considered usually kind of a chaotic time, but it really shows crypto's resilience so far.
Yeah, and one of the things I've talked about on my podcast is all of these are correlated to global liquidity, which has been breaking out to new highs. And you see the stock market, you see precious metals, crypto, all following, and they don't all necessarily move at the same time. Sometimes there's a lag, but we're seeing even real estate overall is moving higher, and is just, if you understand the macro perspective of money printing and currency debasement, and that's happening globally, it finds its way into the market, and you see these assets continuing to rise. So yeah, overall things on the upside.
Yeah, great points there. And then regarding MVRV here, if we just take a look at the last 6 months of trading, in fact, let me make sure it's up to date here. There we go. So what we're looking at here is the 30-day average returns and the 365-day returns. In theory, best times to buy are when both of these lines are underwater, indicating that if you bought in right now, you'd be doing it while others are in pain. And ideally, you don't want to be in when you see super high astronomical average returns for your fellow peer traders that are ultimately your competition. So for example, right as Trump was inaugurated in mid-January, we saw, the long-term MVRV up over 30%. Short-term was well over 8%. And we quickly corrected from there until we started to find some buy opportunities again here in late April. Then, of course, the tariffs happened. Then we got super high again, hit that all-time high around May 22nd, I believe it was. And now we're back in slight danger territory because it makes sense when you've rebounded the way you have. And we just showed the 3-month returns nearing about plus 45% for Bitcoin. Regardless, they aren't that scary. These are pretty modest average profits for traders. And the short term, especially being at plus 2.8%, despite, going back just 2 weeks or so, or about 10 days or so, Bitcoin's up about 7.5%. That's not bad. So buying in right now or adding on to your position is not far-fetched or a completely unheard of or risky thing to do based on this metric. Long-term wise, a little more risky. If you're holding for a long period of time, seeing that average traders in the last year are at plus 18% can be a bit worrisome. But again, it's not that scary compared to like the plus 32, plus 33% that we saw in that mid-January timeframe, right as Trump was being inaugurated as the next US president.
So interesting. And, there's other data points that you can even match up with this, like the RSI, the MACD on the charts, because it shows the overheated zones and then the oversold where it's, everybody turns bearish again. And that's a perfect buying opportunity. And then when everybody gets super excited and greedy, that's a time to sell. So it goes back to, you don't want to be part of the herd that is going through the emotional roller coaster of these things. You want to be doing the contrary, taking a contrarian move against the herd.
100%. Yeah, we see RSI at about 60 right now. So it's a little above that 50.0 average. But again, not in an extreme situation like it was back during the all-time high. If you saw on the all-time high day that the average returns were, plus 11% for short term, plus 27% for long term, and the RSI is almost up to 80 right here. That's a pretty good warning sign that we might be seeing some correction. And of course, we did right afterwards. So keep these in mind right now, on the overheated scale where 5 is average, consider us at like a 5.5 to 6, somewhere like that.
Very interesting. What are the whales doing? Are they continuing to accumulate?
So on the whale side, it's looking pretty good. I'm not seeing really too many signs of dumping. We did see that during the initial news of the US airstrike on Iran. And this 3-day stretch between June 22nd and 25th was tumultuous, and we saw some major volatility in both crypto and the S&P 500. But you can see prices did not really get affected. In fact, most of the retracing happened in the days prior from the 18th to 21st. And then as things rose, that's where whales dumped, because they presumably thought that we might continue to see some war drama, conflicts. Just because they're Bitcoin whales doesn't mean they're all in Trump's pocket, despite what some people often think. So they were unsure, to say the least, and kind of de-risking a little bit right here. But as the announcement of the Israel and Iran truce occurred, that's when whales and smart money and retail actually all got kind of more confident at the same time. And they've accumulated a little over 25,000 Bitcoin over the past week here. So I'd consider that pretty good news.
Yeah. And, even though we have these like peaks and valleys on the micro, on the macro, I look at this chart, I just see an uptrend,
Exactly.
right, from the higher time frame. So even if you have some whales who are like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen with the macro and war and all that, let me take some profits. Overall, the majority of the whales are still holding steady and accumulating.
Exactly. I mean, April 2nd, we're going back exactly 3 months on this chart. So if we go from April 2nd until now, despite all of the news stories with the tariffs and the conflicts and Trump and Elon and the big, beautiful bill drama that's going on right now, they've accumulated, when we talk about 10 to 10,000 BTC wallets, they've accumulated a collective 160,810 approximate Bitcoin. which is about a 1.2% boost to their existing coins over that time stretch.
So interesting, man. I look at this and again, from the macro, I just see uptrend because, when I look back at the sentiment data for, I think it was March 2024, April 2024, and I started seeing the decline and it was a clear downtrend. And I'm not seeing that yet, so I'm still bullish overall. Obviously, black swan events can change anything, but outside of that, it just looks like these guys are still waiting for higher prices.
Totally. I see it the same way.
Now, any other data on the Bitcoin front that we should highlight?
Yeah, I really quick wanted to touch on this trend of shorts pouring in. So this is a quick graph of all the funding rates aggregated by exchange data that we have. And we're looking at Bitcoin, obviously. We've seen pretty consistent shorts going back about 10-ish days or so from June 24th until now. This was right around when the truce was announced. I think it was the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. But people have been shorting Bitcoin pretty consistently. And obviously, they've gotten kind of burned because prices since the 24th have gone up roughly, I think it's a little more than this. We're just kind of zoomed out on the price data right now. Call it about 2%, maybe 2.5%. We looked at the earlier screener and it said we're up about 2.5% in the past week. So yeah, minor liquidations are happening as people are betting against the price of Bitcoin, and that's completely normal. When you see a high ratio of shorts outpacing longs, those shorts can often be liquidated and add rocket fuel to any potential price rise momentum that an asset is enjoying at that moment. And liquidations are always prone to happen. Exchanges are always tending to push toward liquidation. So when they're super long, like we saw here, this was a big liquidation on the 20th that coincided with some of that Israel and US news, and we dropped massively. Then suddenly people shorted and we rose pretty well and are still shorting right now. So that seems to be a good sign. Assuming this can continue, that we can pace toward 110 and potentially challenge that May 22nd all-time high.
Very interesting. Well, I'm biased, so I love to see when bears get wrecked, but
Most of us do, yeah. Ethereum, for what it's worth, is a little more on the neutral side. I presume it's because they've rebounded a bit today and their price ratio is slightly ahead of Bitcoin. Just to look at that really quick, we go to price BTC on our handy menu from Santiment. I'm just going to take off funding rate. It's interesting. It has this noise right here, but regardless, you can see here on this right edge, it's starting to rise. Yeah, I mean, just in the past 24, not even 24 hours, just in the past, 5 hours or so, Ethereum's up about 3.5% against Bitcoin. And that's been kind of rare for people who've been monitoring Ethereum in relation to Bitcoin over the last 3 years, really. Mostly it's been full of Bitcoin edging further and further above Ethereum and most other assets. So, XRP's had its run, Cardano's had its run, but Ethereum's never really had this massive breakout that many of the loyal ETH followers have been waiting for a long time. And maybe we finally start to see something like that in the second half of 2025 here.
Yeah, I absolutely believe ETH is going to have its day and do its run. And, there's often the rotational liquidity into these big altcoins as well. So I think ETH, we saw just about, I don't know, if a few weeks ago, it had that major run, cool down. I think it's setting up for an even bigger move. One of the things I forgot to mention or ask you to pull up was the Bitcoin ETF inflows and what those are looking like.
Yeah, I had it pre-toggled here, and we had talked about this just before the call started, Tony, where they were on a huge streak. This is data as of the end of yesterday. The labels are actually 1 day behind because of time zones, but I'm highlighting the latest day here, where it actually is showing June 30th, but it was July 1st data. So this was yesterday's close. $342.2 million in net outflow occurred, which was actually the biggest day of outflow since May 30th going one day ahead of what the label is showing. Before that, though, huge inflows between June 9th all the way until June 30th to end the month. I think this crossed a little over like $2 billion combined and change. And it was a total of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 straight consecutive days of inflows without an outflow before yesterday broke that streak. So one anomaly day isn't going to tear my confidence down very much. If this becomes a trend the rest of the first week of July, perhaps, then it might be concerning. But all I see here for the most part is a whole lot of inflow coming in as price has supported those inflows. So call this something like 80 to 85% of the days since mid-April have been inflow days, and only about 15 to 20% have been outflow days. I'd say that's a pretty good sign of things to come.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess we'll see how things play out this month, but you're going to have days of outflows. It's like, that is not, these ETFs are very fluid, and you're going to see people take profits for whatever reason, liquidating. But the point is, there's more inflows than outflows.
Exactly, by a landslide.
Let's jump to Ethereum. And I know you highlighted some data before, but I'm curious what the MVRV and sentiment is around Ethereum.
Sure. Yeah, we can do sentiment for both with Bitcoin too. But for the Ethereum side of things, MVRV is looking better than it is for Bitcoin, which makes sense. We saw the 3-year chart where Bitcoin was demolishing Ethereum in terms of pace of price rise. So looking at the 30-day, we're seeing average traders are only up plus 1.2%. Consider that pretty much break even. Average 365-day traders are actually underwater and have been pretty much for most of 2025. And that makes sense because Ethereum did not stay afloat the way Bitcoin, XRP, even Cardano, and some other top cap assets did. So its long-term gains show that there's still an opportunity for some serious rises. We saw Bitcoin being up at about plus 18% on this same long-term MVRV line. So comparing the two, the math says if Ethereum can get some momentum, it would really be able to gain some ground on Bitcoin if you're planning on holding for a longer-term time frame.
I'm curious, if this month we see ETH make another big move, in addition to maybe some big catalyst news that maybe the SEC approved staking in the Ethereum ETF, just timing wise, all of that plays out together.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are waiting for it. Meant to click that button. There we go. So what I'm going to load here are the top developing assets. We haven't talked about this much on our shows here, Tony, but I do think it's important to check in on this list because what it's showing are the notable GitHub events that are happening with each team's project. We take out the automatic Slack updates and routine, cleanups that a lot of projects have on a daily basis so that the data isn't getting noisy. And from what I see, I can read through this list here also, but I see Ethereum here as the 13th most developed asset. That's not the entire Ethereum ecosystem, mind you. That's Ethereum itself. And it's only 12 other projects are outpacing it in the past 30 days in terms of raw development. So clearly the team behind, Vitalik's baby is pushing and trying to improve and innovate consistently. We also have the entire ecosystem we can look at and give it just a moment. There we go. You see Ethereum here because of the amount of assets that are under Ethereum's ecosystem. They are by far showing the most overall development activity events because of all of those other projects that are included under the Ethereum umbrella, if you will. So that's a good sign as well. I think eventually there will be that breakdown point for Ethereum. Obviously not going to be investment advice, but what I can say is the cream tends to rise to the top when it comes to the assets on this list. You don't see a lot of assets that are like outside the top 300. I know Kusama is an exception. It shares GitHub repositories with Polkadot. But most of these are top 50, top 100 market cap assets that are on the development activity leaderboard, and that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, this is a set of metrics and data development activity I've been sharing in my newsletter, because to your point, it's very relevant, and I've been seeing Ethereum rise up on the list. So it's really great to see that things are happening on ETH, and that could contribute to price appreciation.
Totally. Yeah, I know there's a lot of Chainlink enthusiasts out there. Internet Computer, those are 1 and 2 on the list, and Starknet as well is a little more of a niche project people don't pay as much attention to. Cardano has been a consistent presence in the top 5. So a lot of these projects have upside because of the fact that they have teams that are keeping up with the times, trying to innovate, trying to find ways to carve out new use cases on a consistent basis, rather than, of course, meme coins that essentially have no development activity because they're literally there just to be memes and for the LOLs. So if you have some of these in your portfolio, consider this a vote of confidence.
Oh, for sure. Let's look at XRP, how that's performing sentiment-wise, MVRV as well.
So taking a look at XRP's MVRV, they're all kind of sitting between 55 to 60 RSI, by the way. Ethereum was at like 56. XRP is more almost identical, actually, to what's showing for Bitcoin right now. It's at about plus 3% on the short term, plus 18.5% on the long term. That's within 0.5% for both on Bitcoin as well. So yeah, it looks like there's slight risk there, but especially if you're planning for a shorter term trade, there's plenty of argument that XRP can have room to rise here without much risk. And maybe we can look at all three. So I'm going to check, and I'll do this with Solana too, because we don't have MVRV data for Solana, so I'll skip that. But what we can check out here is the mentions of, let's do it. I'm trying to think of the best way. Okay, this will work. So I'll start with Bitcoin here. And what I'm going to do is check out the amount of mentions of bearish, lower, or below in relation to Bitcoin. And at the same time, I'll do bullish, higher, or above. And what we're doing is scraping the internet using Telegram, Reddit, X, 4chan, Bitcoin Talk, and Farcaster as our sources. And we're looking at the amount of mentions related to anything negative versus anything positive. And I'm going to zoom in just to the last week, make this a little easier to see. So bullish, we could probably, now I'll do it with the shared axis on. Bullish narrative is dominating as it always does. But when you see big gaps like this, like right now, these are in 4-hour timeframes. So the current 4-hour time frame shows a pretty severe difference between people being bullish and people being bearish related to Bitcoin. And that makes sense when you see that Bitcoin has just crossed 109K now. Literally during our call, Tony, we're seeing it continue to trickle up toward 110. So it could happen by the conclusion of our discussion. And obviously, the further it climbs on this big monumental green candle that we're on, the more we're probably going to see a separation between bullish and bearish narrative.
Yeah, and it could be, I wonder, well, we got to look at other metrics. I'm just wondering if there's like some sort of pullback nearing with the sentiment so bullish, but you never know. It could go a bit higher before there's some sort of pullback.
Yeah, if it does happen, it's probably going to be short term because the bullishness that we just saw for Bitcoin is happening almost exclusively because of the reaction to the price. So usually just needs a little bit of a cool off period from all the FOMO. So meanwhile, I switch to Ethereum. I'll do it with the price too. And you can see it's pretty much doing the same thing with its green line here representing the price. But the bullish sentiment isn't quite as bad. This is more just like run of the mill, a little more bullish commentary than bearish, which is normal on social media.
Maybe the people don't believe the rally for ETH yet.
Exactly. And people are, you got the long-term investors who've watched it get wrecked compared to Bitcoin over the last 3 years as well, who are just not going to buy in until it sees a sudden 4x the way, XRP did at the end of 2024. And speaking of XRP, nothing really special going on here, just a slight bullish bias. But yeah, I think the main thing to watch is Bitcoin right now to see if the FOMO starts to get out of hand. As I promised, I'll do Solana here too, because this is a really fun exercise to actually just see the raw commentary related to each of these assets. Yeah, Solana, nothing special. In fact, yeah, that's a pretty close gap between bullish and bearishness here, which might argue that Solana could be a sneaky pick for a short-term rally because it's not kept up with some of the other big assets. If I look at Solana and we pull up the ratio of just all of the positive versus negative comments across social media, this is just like a wider comb through from what I just did. Yeah, so we had, I don't know what this was, but there was so much bot activity in the first half of June. And then after this not all-time high, but this big local top happened and we retraced, all the sentiment calmed down quite a bit. And it looks like, yeah, there's about a 3-to-1 ratio of bullish versus bearish comments right now, which is pretty normal for Solana. Going back to Bitcoin. Yeah, so this matches what we just looked at. Big bullish spike here. The crowd has not been this bullish since about 4 weeks ago. And we saw when that bullishness happened here, we did see a retrace. No guarantee that that's going to happen again, but typically when you see these big spikes, especially when they're just reacting to a big price climb, that's when the FOMOers tend to get punished for a short period of time. You even saw it in that isolated mid-June spike that happened. So a little worrisome that we're way up here. That's pretty high for Bitcoin.
Interesting. So yeah, and I'm just thinking about like timeline and when we may see a rally to higher highs, because we obviously hit the 112,000, then we had a pullback, but we haven't really seen that explosive rally to a local top like we've seen in Q2, and obviously the tariff threw off the entire timeline. But there's no guarantees. But I'm curious if we have a short-term pullback and then a bigger rally later this month. I don't know.
Totally. I mean, there's been so many inorganic cogs in the wheel, if you will, that have affected Bitcoin's price. So it's tough to see how much of this is really crowd driven right now versus, the latest news coming from Trump's camp or the fear of war suddenly breaking out. There are so many factors that are still in play right now. Even the tariffs, they aren't resolved yet. We're still waiting for China and the US to have like an official truce, the EU and the US to have an official truce. They're all just kind of being kicked down the road for now, put on pause. Canada and the US just had breakdowns in their talks, so they're nowhere near having a resolution to their tariffs. But all we can go off of without knowing the inner workings of those discussions in our administration's office is look at on-chain data, look at sentiment data, and see whether the crowd is getting overly bullish, which they are a little bit for Bitcoin, but they're not for Ethereum. So that could be a sign that you can keep in your pocket to potentially reshuffle your portfolio. We're not going to advise that, but you certainly can use this to your advantage. So Ethereum, XRP, and Solana, well, XRP actually is right up there with Bitcoin right now. Could be due to some of the latest news with the lawsuit. I know that the judge rejected a $50 million settlement that both the SEC and XRP, or the Ripple team, mutually requested last week. And that caused some weird sentiment stuff and polarizing opinions. But for now, it looks like there's a very bullish sentiment that's forming toward XRP. which is also the highest in about 4 weeks. So Bitcoin and XRP, very high bullishness from the crowd. Ethereum and Solana, very mediocre, not really leaning one way or the other.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know one of the things with Ripple, they mentioned, I think the CEO tweeted out, they're dropping their appeal, and so is the SEC. So maybe that's contributing to that, but we'll have to wait and see. But the point is, the data is showing some peak levels here, and it's something we should be cautious about in the short term.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. One of the things we often look at is stablecoin supply, what's happening with Tether, because we know that liquidity, usually makes it into the market. What are you seeing on that front?
It looks like it's moving back down. Since June 22nd, going back about 10-ish days, the overall ratio of supply and exchanges has dropped by almost 2%. It's dropped a ton since the beginning of June here. Yeah, there's over 3% less of Tether's available supply on exchanges. Now that'll change if we just look at the total amount. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't even been that much minting that's changed the overall percentage versus the raw amount of coins. Either way, there's been a drop of about $2.41 billion worth of Tether over the last month on exchanges. So take that for what you will. I don't see the strongest correlation with Bitcoin's price related to this metric, but we do still prefer to see plenty of dry powder constantly sitting on exchanges as a sign that, a huge amount can be swapped for Bitcoin or a large cap at any time and pump up prices.
Got it. Good stuff, Brian. I'm hoping, as always, next time we meet, that we are seeing higher prices and breaking out to new highs.
Yeah,
but
I think that would be an awesome turn of events that a lot of us have been waiting on. Stocks have been doing so well; they're just continuing to make all-time highs right now. So we're kind of like the meme of the stick figure that's just like poking the stick at Bitcoin, going, "Come on, do something right now." And hopefully, a lot of those bulls out there can get their wish soon.
For sure. All right, Brian, great stuff. Thank you so much. Folks, you want to learn more about Santiment, check out the links in the description. Brian, I'll catch you in 2 weeks.
Cheers, Tony.